We're on.
Well, welcome everybody to today's edition of Anti-Cancer Club's Cancer Book Club. And today we are discussing the seminal work by David Servin Schreiber, Anti-Cancer, A New Way of Life. And so most of us have experienced this book in some form, so we have lots of intense feelings about it. I do. And so I'm looking forward to our discussion today. Now, I have my list of questions, which we post on the website prior to our discussions to kind of get things going. But I guess I'm just going to open up the discussion with the questions in order as we'll carry on. So this book, David Servin Schreiber's book, I read. It was the first book that I read after my diagnosis of colorectal cancer, late stage, 6 years ago now. And so when I rereading it for today, I found that I saw it through different eyes than I did when I was newly diagnosed. So my question, there's a clicking sound going on somewhere. My question is, how do you imagine this book is received by the newly diagnosed and by the long-term survivor, by the caregiver, if there are differences in how it is perceived? Are there differences in how it's perceived? And if so, why?
Well, actually, let's go back to your opening statement because I find this really interesting. What were your two different points of perception on the book? What did you get out of it the first time, or how did you feel about it? And what happened when you reread it?
When I read it the first time, it gave me, I had huge conflicting feelings reading it the first time. First, because one way it was very hopeful and inspiring because it gave all these lifestyle things that a person could do to improve their prognosis. But the things that it was strongly advising at that time, I was not able to do them. So, for example, as you know, there's a great deal of advice in there regarding diet. At that time, my tumor was so large that I couldn't eat solid food at all. I was put on a liquid diet for 3 weeks, like the kind of diet you drink just before a colonoscopy, like clear liquids.
Yeah.
3 weeks of clear liquids. And then once I was able to go off liquids, it was only white things. So you could eat white rice, white bread, all the things in the book. He said, do not, go down that path. And that was the only food I could eat. So I felt, because I had to have super low residue because the tumor was still so large. So in order to avoid obstruction. So
Hi, welcome. Can you hear us? If you can't hear us, go to the bottom left-hand side of your screen. There's a little microphone there and an up button. Click on it and click on the different options, and you will eventually get some audio. While this gentleman looks for his audio, go ahead, Robin. Why don't you keep going?
All right. Yeah. So anyway, I was very distressed because I was reading a book with great advice in it that I could not follow. And and yet, many of the things he said about, tackling the disease head on and so forth were greatly hopeful for me and created a great sense of hope that there might be a way to sort of tackle this. And I was very, that goes into my questions from later, but I was very moved by what he had to say about his own experiences, and even more moved when I read his other books later on. And so reading it now, 6 years later, I feel convicted in some ways because I haven't always been as consistent in following the advice he gave in the book, and maybe I'm going to pay the piper for that down the road, as he claimed he did when he died 20 years after he wrote this book, saying that he wasn't just consistent with his own advice, and he claims that's the reason he ultimately died. But I don't know if I believe that. So anyway, I had a lot of strong feelings reading it a second time.
See, when I first got this book, to me, it was an absolute lifeline because I was given a diagnosis of cancer where I was told, we can beat it back, we can beat it back, we can beat it back, but it comes back. It's essentially incurable. And I thought, oh, I don't buy that. There has to be something I can do. And this book was an absolute roadmap in terms of these are things you can do. I didn't care if they were a placebo. If I believed I had power out of taking charge, it meant everything. And I made radical changes, very radical changes over the next several years in my life as a result of this and other books too. But this book is just a book that pulls together all these various factors so succinctly. It's really amazing.
Well, you know, one of the things that really resonated with me, and tailing off of what you said, Pat, Steffi and I were talking about this earlier. You know, when you're given a cancer diagnosis, you look at evidence-based research, you look at scientific studies. One of the things that just resonated in this book for me, especially just coming back from the San Antonio Breast Cancer Symposium and truly feeling like a walking clinical trial on any given day when I was at that conference, something that he said, and it's on page 19, this is the lesson that this great biologist teaches us is simple. Statistics are information, not condemnation. The objective when you have cancer and want to combat fatality is to make sure you find yourself in the long tail of the curve. And what he meant by that really is just to beat the statistics however you can. And I think that's what his book approaches. I always feel like I followed the advice of my oncologist and my other healthcare professionals, but a lifestyle change, your attitude, what you eat and put into your body, which is so much of what this book is about, I think in many ways defines the type of survivorship you have. Could be long-term, it could be short-term, but I really think that's what we fight it with is these lifestyle changes. And we're all trying to be at the long tail of that curve.
These changes, when you really look at them, are very profound and 180 degrees from the typical North American lifestyle, at least. I mean, he really looks at food and your source of food and what you choose to consume. And many of the foods are probably not foods or combinations that were originally familiar to most of us. Certainly he mentions exercise, and, you know, I think many of us have ups and downs with that. I think the mind-body aspect of this is immense and deep. And I think we could spend the rest of our lives pursuing it and looking into it and still not have answers. And he also talks about the need for social connection. I was looking through some things earlier, and he talked about how serious illness is such a profoundly lonely journey. And that comes up again and again in his book when his peers more or less reject him at that dinner party, when he looks for counsel that isn't there from the medical profession. And I think the way he weaves this personal story into the story of profound life change with a scientific basis is really just astonishing. I love this book.
I think it's interesting, you know, it's a team sport if you look at it in terms of the number of individuals, excuse me, who are on your team, but it's a solo journey. And that's very, very true. Now, I have not, this is the first time that I had read the book. The book was not written when I was diagnosed. Even if it had been, I was 8 years old. So it wouldn't have been on my reading list. That being said.
No, Sophie, it would have been on your reading list.
It may well have been. But it doesn't, I was sharing with Robin before we started that this book doesn't come up in the pediatric cancer world at all. I mean, I had never heard about this book within my clinical practice. And I wish I had, because I think it gives, you know, I really do think it it gives some very practical, tangible things that parents can really latch onto and make an enormous difference in positioning their kids for the best outcomes that their kids can have, from diet and nutrition to keeping them active. I mean, one of the things that we're seeing in the long-term follow-up picture is that we have kids who are so sedentary that they have metabolic syndromes because of it. So there's so much in this book that can be applied to children facing cancer as well, should this book fall into the hands of their parents. And then as a young adult survivor, I mean, it certainly has challenged me. You know, all of you all know that I'm in the process of revamping my diet, and this is an enormous help on that front as well.
For me, I've found that the meditation and the yoga aspect were most significant for me. That although I had practiced yoga in the past and not really done much with meditation, I once had a roommate who kind of got totally absorbed with transcendental meditation, ended up in an ashram, so I didn't have very good feelings about that. But revisiting it again, finding a yoga instructor that I could really connect with, doing meditation with him, and also doing meditation on my own, I realized how much stress I was carrying around that I didn't even know was there. I thought that after I had retired, that it was just the day-to-day stress that I was dealing with, but so much more. And it's very, very helpful to keep me focused, to take time for myself, to remember to breathe. And it you know, the book really made a difference in reinforcing that, the importance of your of stress in your physical well-being as well as in your emotional well-being.
You know, both of you too bring up a really important point, and that is that this is not a linear path. You have to go back, you have to revisit things, you have to try it again. You may have to try it differently, I may have to try something new. It's a pattern of constant experimentation, really, to find a balance that will work at a point in time.
Marian, when did you read the book?
Well, I read the book shortly after I finished treatment 1.5 years ago.
Okay.
And actually it was Pat that had suggested it to me when I had connected with her. And then I just reread it, skim read it, recently. But I've really been, surprisingly for me, been sticking with the yoga and the meditation for the past 1.5 years. And that really has been more helpful than I had expected it to be.
The meditation for me has been life-changing, and I've been a little off of my meditation practice lately, but when I got into meditation because I was under enormous stress, my cancer came raging back. If the doctor at Stanford said, put her on the transplant list, I mean, I was just totally flipping out. And I realized my stress was just pushing me around in my life. And I was desperate. That's when I really got into serious meditation. And I just said, this is it. I'm setting aside time. I am meditating. So in a way, that extreme set of circumstances forced me to make a very substantial lifestyle change that has stuck. And I make sure it sticks because the value of it is so overwhelming. I can't bear to lose it. I can't imagine going back to a life without peace, without quiet, without, an absence of monkey mind, without the ability to, have some degree of consciousness, at least some of the time. But Robin, we should circle back to your original question. I think this book would be wonderful for anybody, for a caregiver, for anyone at all. Hi, Joanne.
Yeah, and I think what you said, Robin, too, you read it kind of 2 different times, right? First, I think really it's a book that can be revisited for many, not just for cancer patients, but for caregivers. And, I think one of the things too that I'd like for you guys to speak about, since you guys have read it more in depth than I have, is this anti-inflammatory properties of the diet, and what does that mean to all of you? specifically?
Oh, I think it's massive.
Seems to be a really important component in fighting cancer cells. What would you guys speak to that about?
Well, cancer is inherently inflammatory. So anything that you can do to start to create an environment that is less inflammatory is very appealing. One of the things that I certainly took away from this is the impact of turmeric as one of the things you can add to your diet. As a matter of fact, last night I had some broccoli and I was trying to figure out what to do with it. Curry. You know, I not a heavy curry or anything. I just sauteed onion, garlic, ginger, put the broccoli in, a little bit of organic chicken broth. Oh my gosh, it was just killer. I used a Thai curry, actually. It was really good. Again, very simple, very easy, but a way to address some of these anti-inflammatory aspects of cancer through your diet.
Well, one really interesting additive that I didn't think about, you know, I like to use grated citrus, you know, in a number of things, but I never thought of just grating it over your salad. I thought that was a great idea. Just grating, you know, citrus skin right over your salad, any salad that I always think of lemon juice in my salad dressing, but grated citrus over my salad. And I love the fact that Pinot Noir, my favorite wine, is very high in dark chocolate.
Actually, that was something I was going to actually raise again. As I say, the book was written 20 years ago. And
no, it was written in 2008. First time in 2008, yeah.
Right. So okay. All right. So, sorry, his diagnosis was 20 years before his death. So anyway, he wrote extolling the virtues of wine, which of course I was absolutely delighted to read. And then of course, since then, there's been all kinds of pushback on that in the world about any alcohol being a carcinogen. And yet, you know, but David said it was okay.
And he was French.
And anyway, from my perspective, again, it comes back to sort of quality of life things too. So even if there are people who are naysayers around wine, I want to live with wine in my life, and it's a choice that I'll make, knowing that.
And again, I think it has to do with the quantity, you know, it just has to do, really, because I you know, a doctor I was speaking to a couple of weeks ago said that you would have to consume 2, you know, drinks per day of hard, and he was talking about hard liquor, you know, for it to have dilatory effects, because I guess it's related. I need to research this more. It's related somehow to estrogen, the liquor. And so that is part of why they don't want breast cancer patients, I guess, you know, overindulging in alcoholic products. So that's something I want to look into more. Because I know since I've been on AI, I cannot have hard liquor anymore. It just makes me not feel good. And I wonder if it's my body saying, sorry, you can't drink this anymore. It didn't make me feel that way before I was on the AI, and it does now.
You know, I Robin's point that you make choices, I think, is a really good point. David Servan Shriver, in his follow-up book, talked about the choices he made in his own life. And one of the choices he made was to stay on a crazy schedule, promoting the book, promoting Anticancer, pursuing his professional activities, ignoring stress management, and some dietary things and whatnot else. But when asked, he said he wouldn't have done anything differently. He was all right with the decisions he made. And I think that's really important, because it's a personal judgment call. And today you may decide to go vegan. I tried it. Life without cheese wasn't worth living. Tomorrow you may decide to do something more balanced. You know, I don't think that there is one answer here, and I think it's highly individual.
Pat, I'm hearing a bit of an echo of your
Is that better?
Mm-mm.
I'll be quiet.
Fine for me.
Okay. Well, they're leading on to another question that I had answered, and I could go to that place, or we could carry on with the questions in order. This talk about David Servan Shriver went on to write other books. He wrote the highly personal Not the Last Goodbye, to chronicle his spiritual thoughts as he faced death at age 50. And the question was, how does his death color your perception of his earlier work? Because he did die of his cancer despite having followed the anti-cancer, a new way of life for 20 years, doing his best with it.
What was his quality of life, though, had he not followed it?
no way to know.
One might, he says, and he speculates that he wouldn't have lived at all. He would have.
Right.
He had his first recurrence of his brain cancer came back. It was a recurrence after 5 years, and then his fatal recurrence was about 15 years after that. And he describes in Not the Last Goodbye, he describes someone sitting down at his bedside in the hospital saying, "So raspberries weren't enough. So colorful fruit wasn't enough. It wasn't enough to keep you safe from this." And he starts off the book by saying, it's kind of this is embarrassing. People are saying, "Oh, well, look, all your advice about food, it didn't matter because look at you, look where you are now anyway." And again, like Pat was saying, he went on to say, "Yeah, but I wasn't just totally faithful in my lifestyle to the whole stress-free piece, but." But at the time as I'm reading it feeling the same way I felt with our last book, is thinking, this man was facing an oncoming freight train. It wasn't anything any human body could withstand, no matter how they lived their life. Yeah. And that the cancer that ultimately took his life, the brain cancer, what he describes in his Not the Last Goodbye, was that every time they beat it back, it would evolve in a new way that was even worse. Like it developed weird tendrils throughout his brain, and every time they moved to a treatment, it would the cancer would jump to sort of a new form that was not defeatable using the previous treatment. So it just kept outsmarting all the treatment options that were done at that time. And so he knew then at that point that he was looking at his death. And so as a result, he wrote a book which was quite different from this book. And this book is very personal, but that Not the Last Goodbye is deeply, deeply personal. And in this book, he talks a lot about, he describes himself as a rational atheist in the book, and as you can tell, he writes very much from the scientific perspective. In his final book, before he died, he wrote a lot about his evolution as someone who is evolving to think about life after life and things like that, and issues that he had sort of put aside or thought of as not something that he would consider, but that when it became very, very personal, he talked about, for example, in the Not the Last Goodbye, he talks about taking a trip to Lourdes, and as being a French Catholic, Lourdes was a very, very sacred place in that ethnicity, and how going to Lourdes was this extraordinary spiritual experience that he describes, and it was super moving to read about it. No matter what your religious stripe, it would have been amazing to read about that. Anyway, I guess I raise that question because there are many who would say David Servan Schreiber died, therefore the new way of life it doesn't matter how you live your life.
Oh, no, I so disagree with that.
Good. So tell me about your disagreement.
I so disagree. I think if you step back and you look at a more global perspective on cancer rates are generally increasing. We may be doing a little bit better. People may be living a little longer. We may have some earlier detection, but we are nowhere on the, we are not getting any closer to really defeating cancer in any meaningful way. And you have to ask yourself why. I mean, we're seeing rising rates partly because of the aging population, but a lot of it goes towards a Western lifestyle. And you're seeing cancer rates increase in societies really where there wasn't much cancer. So I think you have to look at the global things that David brings into this book. The idea of the source of your food. What are you eating? How have our diets changed from maybe 50 or 100 years ago? What about stress in daily life? What about all these factors and how do they come together? I think there's an enormous amount of wisdom in this book. And because he died does not in any way negate anything he's written. As a matter of fact, it's really interesting. You were talking about his spiritual evolution. There's a quote that I wrote down this morning when I was looking through the book. He wrote, "My rationalism verged on the obtuse." And I love that. And I think that one of the remarkable things he does in this book is he not only looks at all these specific, tangible, relatively tangible factors, but he also starts to move into that spiritual health, intangible realm, and what impact does it have? Because his forays into Tibetan medicine, I found to be really interesting.
I also, I was very moved too by his description of cancer patients he had treated, and how atheist cancer patients, and how they died with great dignity because they were able to say, look, I'm part of nature, and there's a tree outside my window. Remember, he talks about that young man who looks outside his window and sees a tree and says, I'm part of that tree, and that tree is part of the universe, and so am I, and I'm just going to reflect on the good deeds I did in my life, and who I loved, and that's how I'll die. And so, you know, and yet he writes a lot about how that young man approached death, and how that young man was very grateful to him as being a friend through that death. And yet when it came to his own death, he did not approach it at all from I'm a part of nature point of view. He really did evolve into his Catholicism as a expression of how he wanted to think about his end and his life.
But in Anticancer, we haven't gotten that far yet.
That's what I mean. This is what I guess I get into, is that I see, when I look at the body of his work, I see someone who started as a rational scientist, and so aren't we glad he did, because he brought such great synthesis of research to us. And yet as a man, he continued to change, he continued to grow, he continued to see his cancer through other lenses. And I just have super profound respect for him in the same way I for Paul Kalanithi, because it's this, to me it's these, they're both the same in the sense that two devoted neuroscientific minds said, I'm going to work and work and work and work and work, and it might kill me, but it's what I mean. This is how I will give meaning to my life. And so that's, I just can't think highly enough. I just can't say enough about how much I respect that.
Well, you're welcome.
I think it's interesting too to see his transformation from a clinician to a patient, because again, I just got home. I've only been home a week from that huge symposium that I went to, over 7,000 people worldwide, and you listen to the clinical trials being done, and brilliant minds at work. But there was a gentleman who wrapped up the symposium who had health issues of his own, not cancer, but it puts a whole different human spin on a clinician who is affected by a diagnosis. You know, they can see more of the patient aspect of it. And sometimes I think that there's a disconnect between patients and their healthcare providers and clinicians when they listen to all of this information. And, you know, I think this book makes that connection. And that's why it really probably resonates with a lot of patients, because it is scientifically based, but he had to cross over that line in the sand, you know, to become a patient.
So that you've moved on to, great, thank you for this. To question 3, there are many scientific books offering advice to those with cancers, the books like Radical Remission and others. But how did the fact that David was a survivor influence your perception of the book and its advice? It made a huge difference to me.
He had skin in the game.
Yeah, skin in the game.
Right.
Yeah.
Skin in the game. Walk the walk.
You know, it's one thing to say, you should do this. It's another thing to live it.
Exactly, and understand the struggles and how it affects your family and all of the other things. And I really loved, as I would, because I love books, as you know, his segue into literature and the stories he read, and how he read Tolstoy and other great writers around this question of death, and how that made an impact on him. I just thought I thought that was marvelous. And his voice, I found his personal stories and his voice in the book. I thought he was working to try to to minimize in the book his current status. So for example, in my book, it's only a footnote that the fact that he's undergoing radiation to the brain at the point that this book is being written. But he talks about his early diagnosis and his early pathway through that and how it impacted his relationships in a very personal way. And I thought that was very meaningful.
You know, in the comments that we have in the month leading up to book club, Steffi wrote one that I think is so profound, and it speaks to this. She wrote, in Chinese, the notion of crisis is written as a combination of two characters, danger and opportunity. Cancer is so threatening that its effect is blinding. It is harder for us to grasp its creative potential. And David Servan Shriver absolutely used this crisis to bring out his creative potential in so many ways, don't you think?
And I guess he was a clinician, a doctor, a neuroscientist, but he also was a therapist, and he describes using psychotherapy powerfully for people and using a therapeutic protocol, EMDR, which is known to is a marvelous therapy, which I can talk about as a psychologist. But one of the things that I felt great loss that he didn't get to go on in the neuroscience career in the direction that he had wanted, because at 32, he already had his own lab at Harvard. That he was really going to do great things and go to great places. Now, he did wonderful things for the planet, the way he had, the direction he would have. But there's a part of me that wonders, what would he have contributed to neuroscience had he been able to go on without cancer? Had that never happened, he still would have been a great, great human being.
What is it? I'm sorry, I just lost my train of thought here. Oh, about his contributions.
Yeah, that's what I was talking about, his contributions to his own field of neuroscience. I just wanted to, maybe I'll bring us back to one of our questions here, question number 4. His section on the anti-cancer mind, he elaborates on the mind-body connection in cancer. He writes, no psychological factor by itself has ever been identified as being capable of creating that bad seed. So stress does not cause cancer. But also comments that, like nutrition, exercise, and the quality of our air and water, certain psychological states can profoundly influence the soil in which the seed develops. How have you approached the mind-body connection issues in your own life since diagnosis? What practices have you found useful, and what has been challenging?
Those are all interesting points, right?
They're all very interesting points.
Yeah. I think what I've discovered, it's a combination of a lot of different things. So there isn't any one thing that a person can do to heal from cancer. What I felt when I was diagnosed back in 1990 was that I had to go to the root of what caused my immune system to shut down and work from that place. So that can be so different for everyone.
Uh-huh.
See, and I don't agree with the idea that, I won't say that stress causes cancer, but I do believe it influences your overall biology. Yeah. And Candace Pert, if you've ever read Molecules of Emotion, she was on the path to a Nobel Prize and for political reasons was set aside, but she showed that our thoughts impact our biology. They do. And so I would actually argue that your thought process is a glass half full or half empty, how stressed are you, etc. I think it does have an impact. It may not be a direct correlation, but I absolutely believe there's an impact. There's a connection there.
Well, I think too that compartmentalizing stress is important because, as they say, there's good stress and bad stress. And if you have stress that's motivating you to do things that are important to you, that are good to you, I think those are energizers and can't be considered bad stress. The bad stress are those things that you cannot compartmentalize out of your life, or get out of your life for whatever reason. And so that's where this book, I think, comes in handy, with the notion of meditation, of body mind awareness, and trying to block out that bad stress that can affect the biology of your body. So I think there's compartmentalization to good stress, bad stress.
Although I would take it one step further. I would say the idea is to transcend it.
Yeah, that's a great word. Transcendent.
The challenge, of course, is that having cancer is exceptionally stressful. So the message to cancer patients to say, oh, you got to get rid of your stress. Well, how are you going to do that exactly? So it becomes an impossible double bind for it to be said, you got to stay positive or else. As Pat says, I think the latest mind-body stuff is more around acceptance and mindfulness, and staying mindful in the moment, and developing a quality of life approach to stress management. Because managing stress well, and meditation and other things, is going to enhance your quality of life, regardless of whether they cure your cancer or not.
Right.
Well, I think for me, the beginning of the book really said it, that you don't have to be helpless. There are things that you can do in spite of having a cancer diagnosis, to reduce your stress, to eat right, to make sure you have a support system. And, that reduces the stress when you're not alone. I mean, right there. So, I mean, for me, that's the key to reducing stress, to not be alone, to have a life and not just be alive. I found the book very repeating that theme over and over. And if I can just get back to make a comment from before, I think having a lived experience, which he had, made the book even more powerful. I mean, I loved all of the scientific references that he had. So he wasn't just talking out of his hat. He was talking from his heart, and also as a scientist. So that's my comment.
Anyone else diving in on these? These are great questions.
What about this next question? Does this book create anxiety in those who are not living the ideal anti-cancer lifestyle?
That's a good question.
I think it can, yes. And I think that goes to learning to set realistic expectations, like we were talking earlier about. Did he choose to live a frantic life? Yes. Did he know that might not be in his best interest? Yes. We're all human. There's no perfection. And certainly what works for one person is not necessarily going to work for the other. I think the key to getting value out of his experience and his writing is to recognize that it is imperfect. Don't you?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think, it's a matter of perspective, and what he's laid out here is something to strive towards, but it's not the be end, it's not the end all. And I think we have to, in our humanity, recognize that we can do, but we're likely not going to be able to do any one thing perfectly. So I think just the encouragement within ourselves to keep on keeping on in each of these areas, doing things that are known to be beneficial. That's where the benefit comes. You can't beat yourself up over that. Coming in under whatever you've set as your mark, because then that defeats one of the whole basic tenets and the role of stress in a process like this. But I think it's a great blueprint. I mean, and I look at it as a roadmap and something to be incorporated across time. You can't take this and apply it all at once. You really have to pick and choose and look at your life and say, what is the one area that could most use some intervention at this point. And it's all about baby steps. And it's those baby steps that are going to lead you to a point where you can sustain a change. And at the end of the day, if it doesn't lead to a change in your behavior, you know, you were done before you started. So I don't know. It's a great book.
I'm sorry, no, go ahead.
I was going to say, one of the things that I found very painful for me when I first read through this was, you know, when he was talking about the value of diet and the value of exercise, that I had my lifestyle prior to getting cancer was perfect as far as this book would have been concerned, that I had worked out almost every day. You know, I was a fitness goddess. I'd been on a heart healthy diet, you know, low fat, low cholesterol, whatever, since the age of 9. When my dad had his first heart attack at 45, our whole family eating habits were changed to conform to just what he described, a minimum of meat, you know, vegetable, grain based, all that. So I thought, how could I, you know, I did everything right. I did everything right. So how is it that I end up with an early onset disease that shouldn't happen at this age? But anyway, the one thing I wasn't so great at was the meditation and so forth. And during my treatment, I did make a real effort to do more of the peace and rest sort of stuff that he describes. But I have to confess that since, you know, getting back to work and getting all busy and all around, that's the first thing that fell away was a meditation practice. I just couldn't keep it up and work full time and do all the other stuff I was doing. And so in retrospect, I kind of think, that was convicting when I read the book a second time, saying, geez, that's the part I let go. And that's maybe not the best decision.
Oh, no. I don't think anybody should beat themselves up over this. I mean, it's like saying, well, I could meditate or I could go out with friends. Well, maybe going out with friends is the piece that's really important or what you need. So I think, as Steffi said, it's an ideal and an ideal of different things you can integrate into your life, but you're never going to hit 100% across the board with all of it. It just isn't possible. And there's no guarantee with any cancer. There just isn't. It's a wake-up call to your mortality. And it's a wake-up call to what do you want to do with the rest of your life.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And these books wouldn't even be written if we figured out the whole cancer.
Exactly.
And we never would have met.
I mean, it's a powerful force, and I think we just need to remain powerful against it because it out-tricks many of us many times.
And you know, if I were to get it, if I were to find my cancer transformed tomorrow, I would not be a happy camper, but I would not look back and beat myself up. I would not look back and say woulda, coulda, shoulda. I think I'd look back and say, I think I did a pretty good job.
Mm-hmm.
Well, like he did, you'd have to sort of say, I made choices, and I made choices for reasons. And some of those choices that you make are for moral reasons or for family-based reasons. And I think someone earlier, I think it was you, Terry, was sort of talking about certain stresses that really can't be escaped, like, say, aging parents and their and that it's our moral obligation to help our aging parents. And that's stressful, but it's not like we're going to walk away from that. We're going to do that because that's
What we have to do.
what we have to do. There, yes, and so same too with stresses related to parenting or other things. So it just seems that you have to. We all of us have to make choices that would take us away from the anti-cancer lifestyle, in the sense of it being zen and peaceful, because sometimes we have to do difficult things like cancer patient advocacy, like I do, or other things that are really, really time consuming and challenging and are often feel futile.
And every now and then that piece of pepperoni pizza walks by in front of you.
And it tastes so good.
M&M's down in my bowl that I keep thinking I just need to throw in the trash right now, but
It's Christmas.
That's what Pat told me last week, Robin. She says, don't check your glycemic index. It's Christmas.
It's Christmas. You're allowed to.
Although I have to say, once you move towards a lower glycemic diet, you know, plant-based and all that, I found I've made some really radical changes. I really have I will say I have no gratuitous sugar in my diet, okay? There a little bit creeps in now and then. If I were to get a soy latte at Starbucks, I know there's sugar in it, and I'm going to adjust, what I choose, for the next day or so. But I think that once you make some of these changes, you feel so good, there's no going back.
Well, and the whole dark chocolate thing.
I love the present.
Okay, so I'm
Thank
here
you,
to tell
David.
you- Yes, and I'm here to tell you that switching to really intensely dark chocolate, I am satisfied, with a smaller cube of it, rather than, it literally, it is kind of a dietary switch that, I don't know how to word it really, but I don't need that whole chocolate fix as much anymore. Going to the right kind of chocolate.
Mhm.
That makes
So
sense.
you need to have the chocolate and the glass of red wine. And have them sit together and think about how great that is.
Yes, skip the M&Ms. Lose the M&Ms. Go for the Pinot Noir and the dark chocolate.
Well, on the 22nd, I'll meet you with both of those things. How about that? At our Christmas party, at the Anti-Cancer Club Christmas party on the 22nd.
It's bring your own,
Pinot
absolutely.
Noir. Bring your own Pinot. I'll have my Pinot Noir and my dark chocolate.
I'll bring some Pinot as well.
Good, good. We'll all be very healthy.
Yeah, it is Thursday, isn't it? Yeah.
Yes, it is.
Thursday.
Thursday.
I'm
Yeah.
gonna have my red wines. Forget this water.
I know.
Absolutely.
What's this?
It's a party, enjoy a little bit.
I'll just make that announcement to all listeners that we are having an Anti-Cancer Club party, and it's at the same address, isn't it?
Yep, right here in our Zoom room.
906 1836. And it's going to be, can you remind us, Pat, about the time?
5 to 7 Pacific, right? Which is 7 to 9, right?
Which is 8 to 10.
8 to 10, 8 to
Eastern.
10 Eastern.
Okay,
So
very good.
anytime in that time frame, depending on where you're located, pop into the Zoom room and we'll have some holiday cheer.
I'm looking forward to that.
I am too.
I hear Pat's going to sing.
Oh my God, I hope not.
But will it be recorded?
Me too, Pat. I hope not. I'm just joking. I want to hear.
I'm not.
I want to hear you. sing.
I'm gonna bring us back
It
to
takes a lot of Pinot to have that happen.
Okay, well, we'll see. I want to bring us back to our last question before we end we've got about 5 minutes to go. If he were alive today and joining us here at Cancer Book Club, what question would you like to ask David Servan-Schreiber?
I'm not good with these questions. I don't know.
One of the things that I find interesting about all these physician stories, and my ex-husband was a surgeon, and so I kind of saw that disconnect with the rest of the world, and I found it troublesome. Obviously, numerous things were troublesome, but anyway, I think I'd like to ask him a little bit about that transition and the experience of going from being a young, hot academic doc to the patient perspective, and then reintegrating it all, and actually going through that cycle several times in his life. I think that really intrigues me for some reason.
Yeah, it does me too, Pat, because I look at some physicians that I've worked with over the years. And when I say work with, I mean in my own personal journey, whether it's, I busted my leg one time. When I look at the surgeon who worked with me when I broke my knee, when I look at the surgeon, who did my reconstruction, when I look at my oncologist who is young, and one of the first things she said to me out of the blocks is, I want to live to see a cure for cancer. When I look at these people and they seem so passionate about their work, I just, sometimes I want to look at them and say, what would happen if you got the same phone call that we did? How would your life change? And I think that's, not to put them in a bad spot, but sometimes I think that doctors and clinicians really need to try to put themselves in that spot. And I think that's what makes this book unique to us, is that he did walk that walk, and we can see that he can relate to us. So I think to me, that would be a question I'd want to ask him too. How do you relate differently now to, because I remember him mentioning once early on in the book that he was so into his clinical studies, and then he had to go into the hospital and talk to patients, and he's like, that's not really what I wanted to do. But that all changed when he became a patient.
Yeah.
For me, I would ask him more about his spiritual evolution and his spiritual beliefs, and how spirituality developed for him over the course of his life, where he was sort of not on that path at all, and at the end of his life very, very much on that path. And there was a part of Not the Last Goodbye that I just found so moving. And he said, look, as a physician, as a doctor, I've been at the deathbeds of many, many people. And many, many times those people would say, I see my mother, I see my father, I see my grandfather, I see my loved one on the other side. I see them. And he would, when he was early in his career, he would say of those people, oh, they're just having a chemical hallucination brought on by whatever necrosis, some kind of thing is going on in their brain to make them like that. In Not the Last Goodbye, he writes, I don't care if that's a chemical hallucination. I don't care if it's the thought that I would ever see my father, my grandfather, at the moment of my death. That matters so much to me that I don't care anymore if it's real or not real. I yearn for that. I respect that. I understand that. And I'm sorry that I dismissed all those people all those years, because now I know what it is to think about that and face that and fear it, but also look forward to it. And I just thought that was such again, from this physician perspective, the rational clinician, people, there people die, there you go. But no, now it's me who's dying, and this is how I feel about it, and how I feel about crossing over to be with my loved ones, either really in a real spiritual sense, or even just even if it is just, as his atheist mind told him at one time, just a chemical thing. Even if it was just that, he still respected it as an experience that happens to human beings and is part of the human condition. And I just thought that he really evolved as a man, and I'd really like to talk to him about that if I could.
Paul did too in our last book, didn't he?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And some of the things Servan Schreiber goes on to talk about around his. One of the things that he said, and I just thought this was so tender, he said of his children, he had very little children. He remarried and had two very young children, one only, I think 2, at the time of his death. And the title of the book, Not the Last Goodbye, he would say, imagine, sorry, talking about parents dying of young children, it's very hard. But he said that the breath of the wind, when the wind would blow, he'd say, when my children grow up, when the wind blows on them and they feel the breeze, I want them to think that that's me touching them and saying, this is not the last goodbye. I'm sending you a new goodbye by sending you this breeze. And I thought that, what a lovely metaphor, and what a lovely thought, and what a lovely consideration for his children, just like Paul Kalanithi, his last thoughts, last words of his book being devoted to his daughter, that it just I just felt like that this is a man who worked so hard for all of us, just like Paul, and he evolved to this man who really, really just wanted more than anything to be a father to his children, and couldn't be, and yet wished good for them, and wished good through nature for them. And I just thought that was so touching.
Well, I think we're feeling his breath and Paul's breath right now in this group. Legacy.
Yeah.
And I guess that goes back to the value of literature, right? And this is why we have this group in the first place. These books are books, they're not with us anymore, but their books and their words stay with us. And so we can keep learning and keep growing and keep getting edified by the things they have to share, because those things are eternal, because they are works of art.
I wonder how many of these books are on reading list for medical residents.
Ha!
Sorry.
We wish.
No, No,
I think it's a great idea.
I do
really
too.
do.
You know,
And
Paul's
I think as advocates, you know, I think that we're beginning to bring this message to the medical community, and there are those that are really embracing it. I think that at these conferences and at these, you know, whatever, I think the medical community is starting to listen to our voice. And
It's starting. I think you're right. I bought a stack of Anti-Cancer, New Way of Life books and brought them into my oncologist's office and put them all through it because I thought it was such a great book. And he really thought I was nuts. He thought I was nuts for doing acupuncture, you know, and not in a bad way. It was just, I mean, he's a good doctor. It's just that he was outside his experience and comfort zone. And one of the things that I love about Anti-Cancer is that by being written as since it's written by a scientist, he opens up the perspective of what might be one's comfort zone. And I think he does it so eloquently on both a personal level and on a professional level.
It's interesting you say that. I brought the book with me to some of my, not so oncology, but to my dietitian appointments. So when I walked in with it in my hand, my dietitian recoiled and was like, oh no, you're going to be a crazy, you're going to tell me all kinds of crazy naturopathic nut barhood. And, you know, I kind of, I had thought that she would have read it because it was such a big book. And I thought, this is a dietitian. People must have referred to this book 100 times when interacting with her. But it is just as you say, Pat, there was this, there is this book created at its time and perhaps even today created discomfort in some clinicians.
And that's part of its power.
That's right. Exactly so.
Everyone, a great book club, as always, don't you think? Robin, any final words?
My final words refer to our next book club in January, January 22nd. We have the absolutely delightful Steve Marzan, whose the book is Dying to Do Letterman. And it is a lovely disjuncture from these doctor books because he's a stand-up comedian. And it's how does a stand-up comedian live their life? And what happens to a stand-up comedian, an ambitious one, when they get a cancer diagnosis that is going to perhaps shorten their career, and what overdrive does he go into to achieve his goal, which is to be on the David Letterman show. And there's also a documentary that I was able to buy it on iTunes. And I know people in the US, if you're on Amazon Prime, you can get that documentary. So I'm going to encourage everybody to read Dying to Do Letterman and also watch the movie before next book club. And Steve will he's committed that he will join us on the 22nd, and I cannot wait for that because his story is hilarious, and it is totally unlike what we've read so far. But of course, as always, there are many commonalities. So I will be writing up some questions for Steve and for the audience and putting them up on the website as we do. And over the holidays, I'll look after that. And so I would just encourage everybody to be there for a lovely change of pace.
Good to see you, Robin.
And thank you, Robin.
yeah, good to see all of you.
Everybody. Joanne,
Everybody have a lovely holiday.
Thank you.
Take care.
Yeah.